Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to be speaking today about the most important thing. Now, I want to say right up front that where I'm coming from with this is through the lens of record production. That's really where I'm most comfortable, is producing and engineering records in the recording studio. But at the same time, this relates to all art forms, whether they're performing arts or visual arts or media arts. And I think also it really relates to business, it relates to interpersonal relationships. So it's pretty important. Now, in 1994, I was recruited by Berklee College of Music to come and help run the music production and engineering program. And at that point, record production was a very new thing to be taught. And in fact, I was a little intimidated because if you think about it, if you're teaching, say, literature, or you're teaching visual art or dance, you have thousands of years of art to study. And you have thousands or at least hundreds of years of curriculum to emulate. But with record production, we really only have about 100 years worth. And if you get into multi-track production, more like 50. So I thought, I really wanted to do this justice. So I made it a point to get into the room with all of my heroes of record production. One of the first ones in 1995 was this man right here, Sir George Martin. Produced a little band called the Beatles. Perhaps you've heard of them. And I got together with him in Liverpool and really talked down what he felt like were the salient issues, the most important things about production, about what he did. And after we talked for quite a while, he actually kind of confided in me. He said in his very elegant accent, which I can only approximate, you know, people often ask me if success changed the Beatles. And I've been thinking about it, and actually it didn't at all. They were arrogant bastards the moment I met them. The second man is this Phil Ramone, and in 1996, I think it was the first time that we sat down for a long time. He invited me out to his place in the country on a weekend, and we talked for hours and hours about record production. He produced everyone from Frank Sinatra to Billy Joel to Paul Simon. And then this guy right here, Don Was, one of my favorite all-time producers. His work with Bonnie Raitt is just seminal. His work with the B-52s, more recently with John Mayer. And the interesting thing was, after talking to these folks and dozens of other record producers over the years, it seems like there's one talent. There is one talent that is absolutely non-negotiable, that all recording artists must possess if they are going to be effective. Which is really fascinating because of the breadth of recording artists. If you think about, say, Bob Dylan at 21 on one hand, making really effective records, and then you think of John Coltrane on the other hand. These guys have totally different skill sets. Bob Dylan at 21 probably didn't know anything about chord scale relationships. John Coltrane didn't write lyrics, and yet they share this one talent. And I think it's actually valuable and kind of fun to think about what could this possibly be? What does, say, Miles Davis have in common with Miley Cyrus? What do you think? What does Placido Domingo have in common with Bieber? They're both really good-looking guys, but that's not it. That's not it. What does Snoop Dogg have in common with Dolly Parton? It's not their hairstyle, I know that. But there is one talent that every recording artist must possess, and that is the ability to convey emotion through music. And I would put forth that that's also true of every art form. When I talked to my father, who's an amazing musician himself, and told him that I was going to stop being a communications major and go into music and be a music major, he cautioned me. He said, you know, I had some friends when I was in high school who were also great musicians, and they went to music college. They wound up hating music. They wound up leaving the field. And certainly, when you study a discipline that you love in college, it has been the tradition that you study the theory of it and you study the technique of it. And certainly, when I was majoring in jazz at the University of North Texas, it seemed as though I was being led to believe that if I could just play my Superlocrian scales fast enough and get all my chord scale relationships down, that somehow there would be a music career there for me. But then I would go home, and I would go play music on the weekends, and I would listen to everything from pop music to funk to classical to bluegrass, and certainly jazz too. But I realized that I listened to music because of how it made me feel. And this is how most people listen to music. If we want to get pumped up in the morning and get to the gym, maybe we'll put on Deadmau5 or Skrillex. If we want to have a nice sensuous time with our lover, maybe we'll put on Kind of Blue by Miles Davis when we're fixing dinner, having a glass of wine. If we want to celebrate something, maybe we'll put on Kool and the Gang. Emotion is vital to music and every other art form. And yet I've heard so many music professors say, well, you can't teach emotion. Can't teach emotion, and I would disagree. So let's dig in a little bit. Let's name some emotions. What are some emotions? What comes to mind? Sadness. Sadness. There's a lot of sad songs out there, right? What's the irony about sad songs? When you listen to sad songs and you're sad, how does that usually make you feel? Better, right? Oh, worse. Somebody says worse, yes. Makes you feel like just jumping out of the window. Don't do that. All right, so sadness. What else? What else do we have? Happiness. Happiness. That's very topical right now because for at least the last 6 months, on the top 5 has been a song by Pharrell called Happy. It will not leave the charts. And I would suggest to you that the reason that this song is so successful is that Pharrell chose an emotion and put that emotion front and center, even named the friggin' song after it. Now, my wife actually feels something different when that song comes on because she's heard it so many times. I think she feels frustration rather than happiness. But the interesting thing is that songs that do convey emotion effectively, often for those who don't get it or don't like it, they will still have an emotional reaction, but it may be the opposite emotional reaction. So, any other emotions we want to talk about? Love. Love. Come on. Nobody's going to make any money singing about love. That's not, couldn't happen. I made a little list, just sat down for a minute and wrote down a couple thoughts. And here it is. So there's all the obvious ones. There's anger, there's rage, but things, it gets pretty interesting. Confusion, righteous indignation. One of my favorite ones. Religious fervor. There's such a wide palette of emotions that choosing one can be a lot of fun. Now, how can we tell if we're being effective at conveying emotion? We could slap people into a functional MRI machine, wheel them on in there, take a look at their brains. A little inconvenient for most people. So we have kinesthetic responses to look for. Kinesthetics, obviously, is the study of movement of the body. So let me ask you this. What are some possible kinesthetic responses that somebody may have to music? Dancing. Dancing is an excellent one. And if you can consistently make music that makes everybody want to dance, you're going to be all right. What else? Dancing is a great one. Clapping. Clapping is another one. Absolutely. Same thing applies. If you can make music and get people to actually move, especially involuntarily, that's a really good thing. I jotted down a few other kinesthetic responses as well. And there's the obvious ones like chills, kind of the gold standard for any art form. If you can consistently make art that gives people chills, I think you're going to be all right. But there's the more subtle ones. I like the protruding lower lip, also known as the stank face. Bass players are good at the stank face, you know? They're playing bass with a stank face. But there's also more subtle ones, like putting your hand over your mouth, cocking your head to one side. And these are all cues that we can use as artists, as musicians, as producers. I often see so many artists making the same mistake where they stand on stage and they play and they sing and they close their eyes the whole time. And it's okay to close your eyes occasionally for a line to make a point, but if you close your eyes the whole time, you are missing out on so much information that you could be receiving from the people that you're playing for. Livingston Taylor says, play a note and watch it land and see what the audience is doing. The same thing if you're a record producer or an artist. Watch people as you're playing the music for them because you can pick up so many cues. I often find that not being clear about what emotion it is that you're trying to convey can actually make your art less effective. And certainly, when you're in the early stages of the creative process, you may just be exploring. You may not have any idea what emotion you're going for. But at some point during the process, if you get to a point where you're saying, this is something that I'm going to work on to completion, and I want to get it into a final stage, at some point, I think it can be very useful to decide, what is the emotional palette that I'm after? What emotions am I really trying to convey here? Because often the artist's intention and the listener's response only overlap a little bit. But if you really make your intention clear and you really decide what it is that you're trying to say, then the artist's intention and the listener's response can come together, and it can be a much more effective and satisfying work of art. Now, this is true in music, but it's also true in all arts. And it's true in business. How does your product make somebody feel when they're holding it? How do people feel when they're on your website? How do they feel when they're negotiating? How do they feel after they've made the purchase or after they've signed the contract? And then also, just in personal relationships at work, personal relationships at home. How do people take you? How do you make other people feel? I think this is what Maya Angelou had in mind when she said that, I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. Thank you.